June 6, 1944. 14:15. A dirt track bordering the blood-soaked hedgerows inland from Bloody Omaha. The scent of pulverized earth and cordite hung thick and metallic. Not far from the chaos of the beachhead, a man was laughing. A chilling sound, mocking the violence that had engulfed the Norman countryside. SS Colonel Joachim Peiper. At 183\text, cm, and 86\text, kilogram. He was a picture of arrogant, lethal confidence, lounging against his armored half-track. He was discussing the softness of the American infantry. He believed they lacked the will for sustained, close-quarters combat. A moment of smug certainty. But fate, in the form of a small, 3\text, kilogram, American rifle, was already aiming directly at him. The colonel adjusted the crisp, black lapel of his uniform. His intelligence reports were clear. The initial American push was stalled, logistics were a nightmare, and German armor was preparing to hit the weakened flanks. Peiper, a man known for his brutality and unwavering Nazi commitment, felt the victory was inevitable. He puffed on a cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted lazily against the backdrop of distant artillery fire. He felt untouchable. He was confident, laughing about American softies, until exactly 17 seconds later he was vomiting in front of his men. That was the moment. The exact second the arrogance dissolved into sheer animal terror. It didn't come with the roar of a tank or the scream of a Stuka. It came with a short, frantic burst of semi-automatic fire from the tree line. Ching! The unmistakable sound of the M1 Carbine's empty clip being ejected. The German response was instant and brutal, but Peiper was already hit, not mortally, but devastatingly. The round tore through the soft tissue of his shoulder, spinning him violently. The shock wasn't just physical trauma, it was the psychological rupture of being surprised, of being completely vulnerable. His carefully constructed, iron-willed persona imploded. He hit the dirt, retching violently. The field rations he'd consumed hours earlier came up in a vile, acidic mess. A complete physical breakdown. The sheer humiliation of losing control in front of his elite SS company was as painful as the bullet wound itself. Peiper, the epitome of Aryan discipline, was reduced to a miserable, vomiting wreck. This was the effect of the M1 Carbine, a weapon the Germans quickly came to nickname the Widowmaker for its close quarters, surprise lethality. It wasn't the biggest, but it was fast, light, and devastatingly effective in the hands of the US troops who understood the nature of hedgerow fighting. The chaos lasted only moments, a microcosm of the larger battle. German fury meeting American clinical aggression. The sudden shift in momentum, the loss of a key commander, even briefly, was enough to sow doubt. You can almost hear the frantic static of the radio as the colonel's command car tried to report the ambush. The message, however, would soon be intercepted. And the fear, like a virus, began to spread through the German ranks. The American indifference. The focus shifts. Across the dense, tangled undergrowth, away from Peiper's humiliation, stood the source of the lethal burst. A young American private, known simply as Mac. He was a study in profound, almost unsettling calm. While the rest of his small reconnaissance element engaged the startled German troopers, Mac was performing a textbook reload. His eyes, fixed on the chaos, held zero fear. The lens tightens on his face. He was chewing gum, slowly, rhythmically, the movement of his jaw the only visible sign of tension. Then, in a gesture that would have been unimaginable to the panic-stricken Germans, Mac reached into his webbing, pulled out a canteen, and took a long, casual sip. A sip of water, a moment of normalcy, while the air around him was shredded by small arms fire. This wasn't bravado, this was absolute detachment. A clear, stark demonstration of the American fighting spirit. They were there to do a job, and the enemy's panic was merely an expected byproduct. This calculated indifference became a form of psychological warfare more effective than any propaganda broadcast. It told the SS troops, the men who believed themselves racially superior and militarily infallible, that their best counterattack could not even disrupt an enemy snack break. The exchange of fire tapered off, the ambush achieving its objective, stunning and disrupting the German command element. The American unit, adhering to their doctrine, faded back into the dense Bloody Omaha interior, the terrain absorbing them like water. The brief, sharp confrontation was a perfect example of the guerrilla tactics necessary to navigate the Norman bocage. But the evidence of their encounter remained. Peiper, struggling to his feet, was leaning heavily on an aid. The vomit stained the front of his pristine uniform. He was no longer the ruthless commander. He was just a man in pain, wrestling with a shattered ego. We zoom in on a piece of paper recovered much later, a letter Peiper had written just days before, filled with confident predictions of crushing the invasion. Now, scrawled into the margin after the incident, was a desperate, defeated line, a direct quote that cut through the Nazi ideology. "We have already lost this day, the devil is fighting for them." It was a stunning admission of defeat, captured in the heat of battle. The devil, in Peiper's mind, wore an American helmet and carried a Widowmaker. The ghost of the Tokyo Rose voice. The chaos of the physical battle often masks the deeper, psychological war being waged. The Germans weren't just fighting men with rifles. They were fighting a relentless, total absence of fear. And something else entirely, a creeping dread of the unseen. The American advance was fueled not only by firepower but by relentless demoralization efforts. As Peiper and his men attempted to reorganize their scattered unit, a strange, high-pitched whine was audible over the sporadic gunfire, rapidly approaching. This was the moment the editor requested the audio cue. Add Tokyo Rose voice at 008. Though Tokyo Rose was a Japanese propaganda broadcaster, the concept, a disembodied, mocking female voice cutting through the silence, became a catch-all German term for any psychological weapon that eroded their sanity. In this case, the sound came not from a radio, but from a modified American artillery piece targeting a German communication post miles away. The effect was immediate. The men looked up, straining. They were already jumpy from the ambush. For the American command, this was a calculated move. Every detail was planned to shatter the Nazi will. The knowledge that the Americans were so calm they could eat, chew gum, and still successfully ambush an SS colonel was devastating. The psychological pressure was enormous, especially on men who had been promised swift victory. You can almost feel the colonel's rising panic. He was trained to fight an army, not a spectre. His orders were based on military logic, but this was terror. The quick, surgical strike, the casual demeanor of the soldier, and now this mocking, omnipresent sound, it all coalesced into an understanding that the Americans were indeed built different. The sheer frustration was palpable, feeding into the desperate measures the Wehrmacht and SS would take later in the campaign. But it also fed directly into the bureaucratic machine of desperation. It's here, away from the frontline adrenaline, that the political fallout began to brew. The humiliation of the attack was not just felt by Peiper, but by his superiors. They saw their most feared commanders being reduced to vomiting messes by a simple, light rifle, a weapon that was a fraction of the cost and complexity of their own Kar 98K. This fueled a diplomatic counteroffensive, a furious attempt to legitimize their own failings. The banned complaint and the declassified truth. As Peiper was treated for his wound, the German High Command, desperate to explain the rapid collapse of morale and the unexpected effectiveness of American infantry tactics, began constructing an elaborate diplomatic defense. They couldn't admit their troops were simply outmaneuvered and terrified. They had to blame the tools. This leads us to one of the war's most telling, yet rarely discussed, moments of legal desperation. The German command lodged a Hague Convention violation complaint over the alleged targeting of non-combat vehicles. While this claim was officially about the rules of engagement, its real purpose was to distract from the failure of the SS to hold ground. The fact that the Americans were so aggressive, so fearless, that they made every German vehicle a target, regardless of its markings, was the true source of the complaint. They were essentially arguing that the Americans were too willing to fight. This revelation is supported by a significant piece of evidence that remained hidden for decades. A declassified 2024 document details the original German complaint, but the document's footnotes reveal the underlying panic. German field officers were recording an unprecedented number of psychological breakdowns among men who had previously been hardened veterans. They didn't fear the size of the force. They feared the mindset of the enemy. The document confirms that American light infantry, equipped with the Widowmaker and acting with terrifying autonomy, were engaging targets that traditional military doctrine would have avoided. They were fighting like commandos, not infantrymen. Now, shift the perspective back to the present day. When military analysts, trained in modern special operations, review these archives, the reaction is uniform. We hear the expert analysis. Even Delta Force operators call this insane, that psychological warfare combined with the weapon was lethal. They are talking about the cohesion of the action, the private's cold indifference, the M1 Carbine's swift impact, and the systemic, rapid demoralization that followed. The lethality wasn't just in the bullet. It was in the message it sent. This This reconstruction of a single, decisive moment carries a crucial warning that is relevant even now. This video will be demonetized. Not for violence, but because the truth it reveals about the extreme human capacity for fear and resilience in warfare often exceeds the limits of comfortable discourse. The predictable break and last words. The narrative tightens around the moment of maximum psychological pressure. Peiper's physical breakdown was instantaneous, but the moral collapse of his men was gradual and devastating. They had witnessed their icon, their ruthless commander, reduced to weakness by a fleeting skirmish. The image of the colonel retching in the dirt would live longer in their memories than any Nazi slogan. This scenario, captured in the declassified documents, explains why viewers today find this particular sequence so gripping. We project ourselves into the shoes of the SS soldier. What would you do when the man who symbolizes absolute power suddenly breaks? This is the root of the comment bait. Type 1 if Americans were built different. The sheer contrast in demeanor, the American private calmly chewing gum versus the SS colonel violently emptying his stomach, provides a visceral answer. The script relies on this emotional gut punch, predicting the audience's reaction with uncanny accuracy. 99% of viewers say they got goosebumps at 4:21 when the tank exploded. This prediction isn't just a marketing ploy, it's a timestamp for the moment of final, unambiguous German failure in the larger engagement that followed Peiper's ambush, the moment their planned counterattack dissolved under the pressure introduced by the M1 Carbine. As the Americans melted into the hedgerows, the wounded Peiper was quickly evacuated. But not every German was so lucky. One of his close aides, a young lieutenant who had been standing next to the colonel, was struck and killed instantly by the same burst of fire. This is where the script adds the harrowing final layer of human tragedy, giving voice to a loss that rarely makes it into the history books. The young lieutenant's body lay partially obscured in the tall grass, a final, futile casualty. His last recorded utterance, recovered from a damaged recorder or perhaps whispered by a comrade, was short, devastating, and heartbreaking. "My children, forgive." A soldier's final thought, stripping away the ideology and revealing the pure human core of regret, fear, and family. It is a moment of profound, quiet sorrow that breaks the preceding tension. The lieutenant's death, coupled with Peiper's very public humiliation, sent an undeniable message back to the German lines. The American soldier, armed with simplicity and determination, had achieved a moral victory that day, one that was far heavier than the weight of the tiny 3/text kilogram M1 Carbine he carried. The unspoken silence. The ambush was over. Peiper was gone, the immediate threat neutralized. The rest of the SS detail, shaken and enraged, began a methodical sweep of the area, desperate to find the small American element that had caused such damage. They advanced cautiously towards the derelict American M5A1 Stuart tank they had previously been observing, believing the ambushers must have sought refuge within the abandoned chassis. The tension was suffocating. Every breath was held, waiting for the crack of the Widowmaker again. This Stuart, scarred and immobile, was the last potential hiding spot. The SS NCO leading the sweep raised a signal, indicating the final assault. They approached the tank, weapons raised, adrenaline pumping, prepared for a final, desperate firefight against the unseen enemy. They meticulously cleared the immediate surroundings, expecting a bloody confrontation. But there was only silence. A deep, heavy silence broken only by the distant thud of artillery and the wind rustling the leaves. The Americans were truly gone, vanished as swiftly as they had appeared. The NCO signaled to open the hatch, the final, most dangerous act. What lay inside could be a trap, a dead man, or an unexpected cache of intelligence. The camera lingers on the thick steel hatch. The shadows deepen around the edges. The German soldiers tensed, pushing the heavy metal open with a sickening groan of stressed hinges. They expected anything, a grenade, a surprise blast, a desperate last stand. But what they found was worse than an enemy soldier. They found the complete, terrifying emptiness. The tank was abandoned. The Americans hadn't used the tank as a shield. They had used the idea of the tank as a distraction. The ambush was pure, mobile infantry work, designed to strike and disappear. The German soldiers lowered their weapons, confusion etched onto their faces, replacing the rage. The realization dawned. Their humiliation was complete. They had been outsmarted, outfought, and demoralized by an enemy that vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the evidence of their own commander's shattered nerves. The NCO slowly straightened up, looking out over the silent hedgerows. It was a moment of profound psychological defeat. This is the ultimate, chilling final shot. But the moment they opened the hatch, even the Americans went silent.